Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering for you today. Firefighters in New York City are protesting the vaccine mandates. We speak with Congressman Greg Murphy, who is also a transplant surgeon, about the mandates and the recent approval of the COVID-19 vaccines for children. President Biden's social welfare and climate spending bill has been cut in half. The price tag is now at $1.75 trillion instead of the previous $3.5 trillion. We take a look at what's been cut out of the massive spending plan. And we sat down with Congressman Ralph Norman to discuss the United States' commitment to Taiwan in the face of an increasingly aggressive Chinese Communist Party. The congressman also weighs in on the NIH's role in funding gain-of-function research in China. President Biden's government dependency and climate spending bill has been reduced in an effort to find middle ground between dueling factions within the Democratic Party. NTD's Melina Wisecup joins us to discuss the details. Melina, what's still in this massive spending bill?
Steve, the Democrats' budget bill to fund social welfare programs and climate programs has been slashed to $1.75 trillion. Now, that's down from the originally proposed $3.5 trillion, but the bottom line is that a lot of the programs that were originally proposed are still there. They've just been reduced. So most of the education investments are still in there, such as universal pre-K, helping families with child care costs, affordable housing, expanding Medicare. Now, as far as immigration, that's still included, but it's important to recognize that this will only cover the border security and the asylum processing, making that more efficient, but it won't include a pathway to citizenship, Steve. And also a large portion of this bill still is dedicated to climate projects. Around 1/3 of the overall funding will be dedicated to clean energy projects. Steve?
And we know the climate portion of this bill is a big reason why Biden is feeling this urgency to unify the Democrats and get some of this legislation passed. Right now, President Biden is in Europe, where he'll meet with other world leaders to discuss climate change. So, of course, he wants to have some progress made on this front when he meets other world leaders with similar interests. Is there any progress or votes going on in either of these?
Steve, negotiation talks between moderates and progressives do look like they're coming to a close, but both bills, the hard infrastructure bill and that Build Back Better bill, are still stalling in Congress, and that's even after President Biden came here to Capitol Hill to urge Democrats to go ahead and pass at least that smaller hard infrastructure bill, but while promising that larger social welfare and climate spending bill will come later. But progressives are just not convinced that it'll play out this way, and that's one reason why they had to, again, postpone that vote on that hard infrastructure bill. Now, it's important to point out that this is the second time that Speaker Pelosi has tried to hold a vote on that smaller hard infrastructure bill and had to bail out and cancel it. And since they couldn't do that, they had to extend the transportation funding again for the third time. Steve?
Now, Melina, there were some Republicans in the Senate who did vote to pass that smaller hard infrastructure bill. What about the House Republicans? Are some of them on board and willing to vote yes for this one?
Well, no, it doesn't look like any House Republicans will vote for this bipartisan hard infrastructure bill. And just to be clear, if and when both this hard infrastructure and the social welfare and climate spending bill, when both of these bills pass, it will still be around $3 trillion in spending. Now, of course, President Biden says this will be fully paid for, but that's only if the government can rake in enough revenue to cover the costs through the means that they're proposing in this bill. Now, Steve, I want to switch topics here and point out some news on the vaccine mandates. So a D.C. district judge just temporarily blocked plaintiffs from being fired if they don't have the vaccine. Now, this is while they're waiting for the religious exemption requests to be processed. This started with 20 people who sued the Biden administration over his vaccine mandates. Now, this D.C. judge also ruled that for military members, if they're on active duty and they have their religious exemption requests denied, they still cannot be fired or disciplined if they choose to appeal that rejection, that religious exemption rejection. Now, this being among the first cases about the vaccine mandates, it just hints at how other courts may rule on vaccine mandates moving forward. Steve?
Melina reporting from Capitol Hill. And hundreds of firefighters and city workers protested against New York City's vaccine mandates. They'll be put on unpaid leave starting next Monday if they choose not to take the shot. On Thursday, firefighters and city workers gathered outside the mayor's residence in New York City. They are required to take at least one dose of the CCP virus vaccine by 5 p.m. today, with no testing option. The city's fire department is preparing to close 20% of its fire companies and decrease 20% of its first responder ambulances after the policies take effect next week. A new survey by the Kaiser Family Foundation shows more than 70% of unvaccinated workers vow to quit their jobs over the mandate. The ripple effects that will be felt from these vaccine mandates stretch across most sectors and industries throughout the United States. As more experienced and capable people continue to quit, resign, or get fired for opting out from the shot, it will be hard to calculate the overall damage to the economy and the country as a whole. To try and make some sense of it, we spoke to transplant surgeon, physician, and Congressman Greg Murphy. Here's some of what he had to say. Congressman Greg Murphy, thank you so much for joining us in the Capitol Report.
Steve, thank you for having me here today.
Now, Congressman, we have the vaccine mandates, various deadlines starting to approach. Americans from across the country are going to be withdrawing from their jobs, resigning under duress a lot. What would you say to these folks right now that are in this situation?
You know, it's a difficult time, Steve. I'm a physician. I've been one for 30 years, and I think the vaccines are safe and effective. However, as I've said all along, this is a medication, this is a treatment, and I believe that decision should be made between a doctor and a patient rather than the government and a citizen. And the fact that the Biden administration has come down with these really heavy-handed mandates is problematic because, yes, I want people vaccinated, but they're not understanding what happens in the secondary or tertiary consequences. Now you're driving people out of jobs that they've had for 20 years, 30 years. You're driving people out of the military. We're going to be now threatening our national security because of this. They're doing the same thing in the military. And what you're going to be doing is you're going to be driving people into unemployment. Unemployment and poverty in and of themselves are risk factors for poor health. So they're going to be creating more problems and in essence in trying to, quote, solve another problem. It's very short-sighted. It's emotionally based. You know, I want people to be vaccinated. We have treatments now. And the fact that we're pushing this down, again, the heavy hand of government, which is what we've seen from day one in the Biden administration, is we want the heavy hand of federal government taking control of your lives. This is just symbolic of what they're doing overall, just in this one particular sphere.
Now, Congressman, you're a physician, obviously congressman as well, but a scientist by nature as a doctor. When it comes to the issue of naturally acquired immunity, why has this been left off the table for so long, out of the discussion? And should these people that are facing the mandates have had the option to produce?
Yes, without a doubt. Natural immunity is basically, just so that folks know, it means you've had COVID and your body has developed its own natural response to it. So it's natural antibodies. And the fact that I really think the question should be not, are you vaccinated? The question should be, are you immune? Which means you've either been vaccinated or you've been exposed to us and have the antibodies. And actually at our medical institution, of which I'm still an active staff member, they're smart enough. They asked for both of these. They say, do you have your vaccine or are you immune for hospital privileges and for being on staff? But I think it's being lazy, point blank being lazy by institutions, by this federal government, by companies to not allow that as vaccination status. Because to be honest with you, and the studies have shown that actually natural immunity is stronger than this artificial immunity that's been given to us by vaccines. It's lazy, it's short-sighted, and it's actually going to cause, again, an opposite effect of the health of the people of this country.
Now, the vaccines have just been approved for children between the ages of 5 and 11. Is this still under the emergency use authorization?
Well, with the FDA, yes. Now, what the problem I see there is Dr. Fauci has said, well, we have vaccines for children, we've had them all the time, this is no different. It's entirely different. The vaccines that we have for children are measles, mumps, rubella, those things that we give kids, we have to have them before they go to school. And I agree with that, that's fine. But the problem is those are childhood diseases. As we see with COVID, COVID is not a childhood disease. It can affect children, but its lethality rate is infinitesimal compared to what it is in adults. And so now, Dr. Rubin, who I find out is not a physician, a biologist, has made in my opinion, one of the most dangerous statements I've ever heard about healthcare, that we have to give these kids the vaccines to see what the long-term effects are going to be. How's that going to sit with the average mom, the average parent that cares about their child, that they want their child experimented on? That is literally the most dangerous statement I've ever heard in medicine. And the fact a non-physician made that statement, who's on the FDA panel, really is something that's scary.
Congressman Greg Murphy, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Have a great evening.
This week, Florida is tied for the lowest rate of Wuhan coronavirus cases in the United States, even without any vaccine mandates or lockdown restrictions. Florida's Department of Health data shows that Florida has 9 CCP virus cases per 100,000 people, while the national average is more than double that amount. Among school children, cases decreased by about 87% since August, and in adults it has decreased by 93%. Florida is tied with Hawaii for being the state with the lowest case rate. The CCP virus is the virus which causes COVID-19. And the White House said on Wednesday that the rule on vaccine mandates for private businesses will be ready soon. And small businesses say they're struggling to find qualified workers while major U.S. retail chains raise hourly salaries. A Chamber of Commerce and MetLife survey reported that 49% of small businesses now say they are struggling to find qualified workers. That's up 15% from June. Meanwhile, Target, Starbucks, Costco, CVS Health, and other major retailers are raising hourly wages to $15 or higher in an effort to recruit more workers. The move comes amid a nationwide labor shortage and is in line with President Biden's push to raise the minimum wage. Congressman Ralph Norman of South Carolina has just introduced legislation to effectively process illegal entries on the southern border. The congressman also weighs in on the growing threat of the CCP. Congressman Ralph Norman, thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report.
My pleasure.
Congressman, you just recently introduced a bill, Stop the Surge Act, which essentially establishes new ports of entry for processing migrants. What is the significance of this?
The significance is trying to slow down what's been a complete disaster. It's been an open border. Why the wall wasn't continued to have an orderly progression, and the states are being flooded with illegals. They're being transported in the cloak of darkness to every city in this country, and it's concerning. It really is. So this was just an attempt to slow that down and to have some order or some process to it, which we don't have right now. And whether he abides by it or whether we get any kind of response, we have not had any response of the many letters, not just this bill, but the letters we've written him. He does not respond. They don't react. It's as if they're tone deaf.
Now, I just want to switch gears a little bit and ask you about the NIH. There's been some news breaking. Do you believe the NIH, the National Institute of Health, has funded or knowingly funded the gain-of-function research taking place in the Wuhan labs?
The letter they got, the ranking member, James Comer, said that they did, that the United States took part in funding gain-of-functions in China. The seriousness of this, NIH is not some small organization. They're well respected. They've been around a long time. For them to write a letter that directly is in direct opposition to what Fauci is saying. He will not apologize. He's continuing to say that there's no funding that's been taking place from America, and it has been. Why would the NIH put themselves at risk and put it on paper a letter that says just the opposite from what Dr. Fauci says? It's time for him to go. He's been all over the board. And if he was serious about this, he would at least tell the truth on this. And why is he not doing this?
You are starting to see mainstream media pick up this story. It does seem like it's gaining some steam. With that said, what do you think the rationale would be, knowing the safety track record of China when it comes to not being able to contain viruses in their labs?
Well, they're associated with the military, the Chinese military. They've been they have not allowed Americans inside to look at the labs. They've been real select. Had it not been for Trump shutting off the pipeline of people coming over, they wouldn't have shut it down. And so it's a crisis that is caused by China, it's funded by America, apparently, from the NIH. And why this isn't the focus on this administration, you haven't heard of any research on holding China accountable. They're just letting it continue. And as well as letting people in the country that are not even being tested for the coronavirus. They don't wear masks, and they're just being let in without any knowledge. It's a train wreck that's already happened in this country.
Now, Congressman, I want to ask you about Taiwan. President Biden recently said in one of his town halls that the United States has a commitment, or has made a commitment, to protect Taiwan against China. What types of things do you think we should do to live up to that commitment?
One, he's not going to be able to get by with his words the other day at his town hall when he said, yes, they will respond, they will take action. Well, what kind of action? China's flying into the military space of Taiwan daily. That's a direct violation of the covenants that they've signed. And now, what's this president, I mean, why isn't he holding news conferences, getting his Secretary of State to say, this is what, if they keep doing it, this is what we're going to do. Taiwan is petrified. But you take actions militarily or at least have a guideline as to what's going to happen if they keep doing this. China, as a rebuttal, it comes down hard on America. We're not the aggressors with Taiwan. China is. And it's just like with the virus and so many other things, it's all words and no actions. Where has he laid out his plan as to what he's going to do?
Do you think that a larger troop presence should be part of the conversation when it comes to Taiwan having a U.S. presence?
I think everything's on the table. I think being aware of the technology to find out what they're doing. When they did the hypersonic missile around, that we just found out about, took place in August, and just knew about it, there is a disconnect with our intelligence. We need to get our intelligence up to speed, and whatever it takes. I don't know that he sees that, though. I mean, why is he not addressing it and laying out steps to tell the American people to keep us safe? Because it hadn't worked so far in the last 9 months. But we need a plan, we need action by his, or at least some willingness to offer something other than words. And he needs his top military people involved. If he's not capable of understanding it, let us hear from the military generals, and let's hear from the chief, the Secretary of State as to what's going to happen.
Congressman Norman, thank you.
My pleasure, thank you.
And coming up, Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen has confirmed that U.S. troops are deployed on the island. It's the first official public confirmation from Taiwan in 40 years. For decades, popular opinion among Washington bureaucrats has been to refrain from angering the CCP. When it comes to Taiwan, our next guest says that it's time for the U.S. to flex its muscle to make up for lost ground. Congresswomen from both political parties and members of the press have come together to raise money to fight against breast cancer. Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen has just confirmed that U.S. troops are in Taiwan. She also says she's confident the U.S. would defend the independent island against China.
How many U.S. service members are deployed in Taiwan right now?
Not as many as people thought.
In a CNN interview on Wednesday, Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen confirmed American troops are indeed on Taiwanese soil, the first official public confirmation from Taiwan in 40 years. She also says that Taiwan is widely cooperating with the U.S., aiming at increasing defense capabilities. And she has faith that the U.S. would defend the island if mainland China were to attack. The Chinese Foreign Ministry quickly expressed opposition to the U.S. having military ties with Taiwan. Earlier this month, Chinese Communist Party leader Xi Jinping declared it's China's historical responsibility to take over Taiwan. In recent months, the Chinese Communist Party, for the most part, has been able to dodge global criticism for their role in allowing the CCP virus to pour out of China, all the while they had already locked down their country internally, with recent acts of aggression toward the independent nation of Taiwan, and just last week unveiling a hypersonic missile shocking the civilized world. We spoke with China expert Rick Fisher, who is a senior fellow at the International Assessment and Strategy Center. Here's a look. Rick Fisher, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Rick, recently President Biden was at a town hall where he doubled down, or at least said that he would commit to supporting Taiwan, in fact, if the Chinese government were to make any move. What is your take on the messaging from the administration?
Well, Biden made his statement, yes. When asked directly, he said the United States would defend Taiwan. But within 24 hours, the White House spokesman and then the Secretary of Defense and Pentagon officials were walking this back. Joe Biden had actually done something very positive that many analysts and observers have been advocating for decades, and that is that the United States make clear its commitments to Taiwan. Over the last 42 years, the United States has had an ambiguous relationship with Taiwan, but this has been changing gradually as China's intention to invade and conquer and take over Taiwan has become clearer.
Now, how vulnerable is the island of Taiwan to a CCP occupation?
Well, it is extremely vulnerable. The Chinese are amassing an amazing force against the island, and they are building and deploying all the minutiae necessary to actually invade the island. And not just invade the island by sea, but also invade the island by air. They've amassed over 1,000 helicopters to support air assault units to capture airfields. They are creating new mobile docks so that they can utilize large civilian ferries to transport troops and armor. The PLA could put over 100,000 troops on that island in just a few days. It essentially has the ability to conduct a D-Day level invasion of the island of Taiwan. And the island of Taiwan, although very well armed, is not expected to hold out for very long.
Should the United States have more of a substantial troop presence on the island? And if so, why the hesitancy?
The hesitance is because we do not have a formal military treaty with the government on Taiwan. This really is necessary in order to create a legal structure for the deployment of troops at a minimum. So, our deal is done. We're going to recognize Taiwan as an independent country, and then we're going to have a defense treaty. We can do that, and then we can deploy not just troops, but we could deploy tactical nuclear weapons, like we did in the late 1950s and early 1960s. If we do that again, then China has no option but to stay put and try to do what we have been urging for decades.
Rick Fisher, thank you.
Thank you.
The Justice Department will award more than $21 million to prevent and respond to hate crimes. The Department of Justice announced Thursday that the agency will allocate more than $21 million to investigate and prosecute hate crimes and toward the assistance of hate crime victims. Funding will help state, local, and tribal agencies and community organizations to address an alarming rise in violence and property crimes based on race, color, and national origin. A Democratic congressman from Maryland announced that he has deactivated his official congressional and campaigning Facebook and Instagram accounts until Facebook and Congress make substantial reforms. Democratic Representative Dutch Ruppersberger said Wednesday that his decision to close the accounts is due to disturbing whistleblower reports. He says that Facebook's own research has revealed its harm to democracy, the mental health of teens, and the amplification of hate speech. In a news release, Ruppersberger said that while Facebook must do better to police themselves, Congress must also act and pass reasonable social media reforms. And in the wake of public outcry and recent whistleblower testimony in front of Congress, on Thursday, Facebook has officially changed its name. In an effort to rebrand themselves, Facebook will now be called Meta, M-E-T-A. On December 1st, the company's ticker on the stock exchange will change from FB to MVRS, short for Metaverse. And congresswomen from both parties and members of the press come together to raise money against breast cancer. The Congressional Women's Softball game returned Wednesday night. The press team won 5-1. This annual event was canceled last year due to the CCP virus pandemic. The event raises money for the Young Survival Coalition to help them battle breast cancer. This year's game had already raised over $500,000. And thank you for tuning in. That's all we have on the Capitol Report today. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.